Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. I am so excited to see you all. Happy Women's History Month. We are still expecting a ton more people, but we will get started on time because I know you're excited to hear from our guest today. So I'm Mia Dan. I'm the founder of Women in AI Ethics. Happy Women's History Month to everyone. At
Awesome.
Women in A in Women in AI, at Women in AI Ethics, we celebrate women every day. One month is just not enough. One day is not just not enough. We celebrate fierce women every day. You know what they say about strong women? Let's maybe know them, maybe be them, maybe raise them. So with that, by way of quick introduction, who we are, what Women in AI Ethics does, we focus on three key issues: erasure, exclusion, and ethics. We make sure that women's contributions to this very critical space is not ignored. We make sure that women's voices are represented in every important discussion related to AI. Last but not the least, when we talk about ethics, we uplift the voices of women who and the work of women, like our guest today. These are women who are working on very specific ethical issues, and there are so many of the human rights, privacy, biases, and the list keeps going on. So much respect for women who have done the hard work of doing the work and researching, investigating. So if you haven't already, you can sign up for our mailing list. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website. And Gabby, who is in our chat, will share that with you. We will have Q&A today. I just have we'll confirm with our guest if she's able to stay for Q&A. But this webinar is on the last Thursdays of every month at 11 a.m. You asked and we listened and we moved it. But we do record it. You will get a recording. And also we will have for 1 hour, and after that we will have a Q&A. So if you can stay on, that'd be wonderful. But we will confirm all those details. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest for today. We have invited Hilke Schellmann. She is an Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist, and she's also a professor of journalism right here at New York University. Yay! I um, I was so blown away by her book, The Algorithm, how AI decides who gets hired, monitored, promoted, and fired, and why we need to fight back. She is a contributor to the Wall Street Journal and the Guardian. She writes about holding AI accountable. And in her book, she has investigated the issue very specifically of the world of work because it's so critical, it's so important. She has brought receipts. She has exclusive information from whistleblowers, internal documents, and real world tests. So we are so super excited to have you here today. Okay, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so delighted to be here, and I'm going to steal the receipt lines because that was my aim with the whole book and the research, because I think it's so important to, think about sort of the theoretical bias. I think that's all really important, but I also think it's really important to look at what is already happening on the ground and what is good and, maybe critical use cases. And I set out to sort of understand this world, and I was a little bit thrown maybe how much harmful AI use cases I have uncovered, and I can talk about that. And I also think, like, I always invite people to steal my methods because I'm not a machine learning expert. I don't code. Maybe with a co-pilot I can do now, but I'm not, like, educated in that. So if I can test these tools and they break on impact, and I can tell folks, like, here's how I tested it, this happened, anyone can. So I think this is like, would be really helpful to journalism, civil society, and like the public to, like, if we test all of these tools through our abilities and sort of can add to the conversation, like how we can build a better tool and which ones work. Like, I'm not against AI tools who are working great. We should totally use those. So yeah.
I appreciate that so much because our philosophy at Women in AI Ethics is to make sure that everyone is represented, everyone is included. And we push back against this notion that only an engineer or only a computer scientist or data scientist should be involved in this discussion, or only they are the experts. I love that you're showing us how anyone from any background can apply their expertise to start interrogating these tools and finding out how they may not, are they working for us? What is the opportunity? But also, how are they biased against us and how we can protect ourselves from the harms. So I so appreciate the work you've done. I have to share two things. One is I want to share how grateful I am that you wrote this book because I had two incidents this week. I was talking to a colleague about how the recruiting system is just broken. How is system, the process is broken. I'm hearing from so many women in our community. I look at specifically even AI jobs. Just the requirements do not match, right? What is needed for the jobs, it makes no sense. And I started reading your book. I'm sitting on the subway and I'm reading your book and I go, my colleague I was talking to about, I texted him. I said, you have to pick up this book. Start reading it right now because this woman, she has written this entire book. She has cases and she has all the information you need. So thank you. And then
Yeah.
yesterday, I was at the PM NYC panel with another amazing women. It was all organized by these incredible women. And my fellow panelists talked about bias in recruiting systems. And guess what? Out of my purse, came out this book,
Thank you.
and I'm just waiting it. I'm like, you got to get this book. Keep it on your bookshelves. Refer to it. This is such an important book. More people should read it. More people should be looking at the insights. So I'm excited. Thank you for doing
Yeah,
the
and I
work.
think that's kind of maybe also a good note to job seekers. It's like, it's probably not you if you get a lot of rejections, right? I mean, there's ways to tinker your resume and things like that, but we also seen from like I've talked to folks at LinkedIn and other job platforms. I mean, they see that some people and a lot of people actually like apply to hundreds and hundreds of jobs before they find a job. So it's really not on you. It's like the system is not necessarily set up for people to succeed. There's a couple of advice I can offer, what
Yes.
may work and it has worked for some people, but I just wanted to put that out there. It's like the system is broken.
Thank you. We've been talking to so many women, and I come across so many qualified, talented women. And I love that you mentioned some examples, and we'll go through those. Is that women already have this imposter syndrome, and it's not their fault because the systems and the structures are telling us that we are not good enough when it might actually be the system. So you are not imagining it. There are so many biases in the system, it's not
Yeah,
working
and we
for
actually
you.
know that now
That's
from, a lot of job seekers think that, right? The system is
yes,
broken, what's happening? I sent these applications into the void. But we've
yes.
now also seen is there is Joe Fuller at Harvard who did a survey of C-suite leaders at over 2,000 companies in the US, UK, and Germany. And he found out that when companies use AI tools, almost 90% of the leaders said, we know that the tools reject well-qualified candidates. Like they know something that like job seekers have always, sort of maybe assumed that, they are well qualified. They know because they look at the job description and they do get rejected from these systems. Unfortunately, the survey also found out that that in almost half the tools, that those companies use, if you had a 6 month or longer job break, the tool would immediately reject you. So just one thing is like if you were doing freelance or something, or you were, on parental leave, it might actually be worthy to put that in because a system will notice the break, but an AI system obviously doesn't have any cognition and if there's parental leave for some time or freelance, like it's not going to check if you were out of a job or not. Like it doesn't understand that, but it checks sort of dates. So that's not in all AI systems, but in enough of them that I think that might be a warning sign for folks. You be
Absolutely.
the most qualified candidates and you get rejected for something that has nothing to do with the job. And also, it's really unfair. It's not the right criterion.
Absolutely. That's why I want to dive deeper into your book. But can I start with one
Yeah.
personal question?
Yes.
We love hearing about women, like, the women who are working in the space, their stories, like what inspired them, because this is a lot of work. Writing the book is not easy, and not everyone can do it. Can you talk a little bit briefly about what inspired you and how long did it take you to
Yeah,
write
I
this
mean,
book?
it's like, sort of a process. And, I should say that, I've been an investigative journalist for a long time. So like I dig and dig and dig and, I'm sort of a detective for the public, if if that makes any sense. And before this, I've actually never done any tech stuff. I mean, I did work for the Wall Street Journal, but I was just a video journalist doing all kinds of stories. And before this, I actually did like a film on sexual assault in Pakistan that won an Emmy and went to Frontline. That is usually what I did, like long form videos on social justice issues. But in 2017, I was at a conference in DC with consumer lawyers, had nothing to do with AI. I wasn't even thinking about AI. And I needed a Lyft ride or a ride back from the conference to the train station. So I called myself a Lyft and, got in the back seat as we all do all the time. And I just asked the driver, how are you doing? And he was like, I've had a weird day. And, I was like, oh, no one has ever said that to me. So I was like, oh yeah, what happened? And he was like, I just had a job interview with a robot. And I was like, what? Job interview with the robot, right? I'm a nosy journalist. I was like, what is that? So he told me that he had applied for a baggage handler position at a local airport, and he got in a call, maybe an hour or so before, and somebody asked him 3 questions. Like he said, a robot, probably pre-recorded questions, right? So this was in like late 2017. I've never heard of this before. And I was like, okay, noted it down, like look into robot interviews. Seems like a really interesting thing. I forgot about it until a few months later. My colleague Meredith Bussard, who actually has been looking into AI for a very long time, she was like, "Oh, I'm speaking at this conference. You should come." And I was like, okay, I mean, I don't really care about it, but whatever. Like, I'll walk over there. It's at NYU's law building. I can do that. And that afternoon, there was a panel by someone who had just left the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is one of the regulators of the world of work in the U.S. And she spoke about that she's really worried about what's happening with companies that they use basic algorithm to look through their employees' calendars and check how long they are at work and, have their butts in the seat. And she was really worried that, you know, not everyone has the same chance to be as long at work as others, right? Like we know that people with disabilities and people with caregiving obligations, which are mostly mothers, women, have higher absentee rates for obviously very clear reasons. And she was like, I'm worried that there is like, discrimination of protected groups. And she's like, no one is talking about it. And I was looking around, there were like 5 people. I was like, I guess there's also no journalists. So that really people aren't talking about this. And she also told me about a company, HireVue, that was using facial expression analysis for hiring. And I was like, okay, I got it. Somebody has to do this work. So I called the former chief data scientist at HireVue, and I maybe understood 1% of what Ben Taylor was talking about. I was just like, what? Facial analysis and intonation of voice analysis for hiring seemed wild. So I went to a conference on HR, and half of the panels were about AI. There were so many vendors with their AI, and this was in early 2018. So I was like, wow, this is already happening. And I think there's a structural difference, and I think that's what we often see, that the technology is really ubiquitous for a lot of hourly workplaces. So in like retail, fast food, call centers, work that is usually isn't paid really well. People don't have a lot of protections. Folks in those jobs maybe also don't have the time to actually like fight back, and there's sort of a real power imbalance. We see a little bit that the AI in hiring has been, Delta Airlines used it at one point for all of their flight attendants to do AI-based HireVue one-way video interviews. We've seen it in investment banks. We've seen it for a lot of young graduates at universities. Like my students all know HireVue and Pymetrics because I've been subjected to these technologies. But people who are maybe a little older, they have 10 years of experience or so, they may not really heard of it because of the business functions this is used in, yeah. And also in the ways that it's used. Also, like it's used by all job platforms, right? Like LinkedIn, Monster. I talked to all of them. They use some form of AI. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but maybe I can share a 2-minute video of what I've encountered with HireVue, because I think it sort of shows sort of the level of what kind of technology is being used in people. It's actually hard to sort of explain. It's much easier to see. So I brought like just a quick 2-minute video that we did in 2018 when we set out to understand, like, okay, what is done with HireVue? What does HireVue do? And just to give you a sense of scope is that, so we know that almost all Fortune 500 companies use AI in the hiring funnel, from screening people, from interviewing to AI-powered background checks. And we also, HireVue does about 100,000 one-way video interviews every day. So you get like pre-recorded questions on your phone or on your desktop, and you sit by yourself answering them. And some of you may have encountered those. Some of you may not, but it's pretty ubiquitous. So I'm going to share this clip really quickly. It's with my correspondent and colleague Jason, who's traveling with me, but you won't see me to Utah.
We begin our exploration of the new world of hiring with a visit to the headquarters of one of the companies that's pushing the envelope, HireVue. Its artificial intelligence assessment tool is used by over 50 companies, including Unilever and Hilton, which both declined to comment. This, I'm told, is a typical digital interview for someone applying to become a customer service rep. It confronts me with several scenarios that, on the job, I might encounter.
If you can't help me resolve this right now, I'm going to take my business elsewhere.
I'm here to try to make things better. I go into this knowing something that HireVue acknowledges many job candidates potentially do not. That my responses are being assessed not by human beings, but by AI, analyzing my tone of voice, the clusters of words I use, and my micro expressions. So here's what's wild to me. The notion of micro expressions, is that what you're calling them?
It's the facial analysis software. It's capturing, if you think of facial movement, smiling, frowning, eyebrow movement, those are actual database points, and they roll together to give certain emotions and traits and personality and thinking style things.
Here I am.
Yeah.
I just did the interview for a job as a customer support representative. How'd I do?
The first thing is we look at the AI score that's attached to it, and you can see that up here. You scored it at 37%.
That's pretty good, right?
No, that's out of 100, right? So you're kind of in the bottom third, if you will, in that job, so you'd be a low match, essentially. My rating is the result of HireVue's AI comparing my responses to those of actual employees. Essentially, my performance is being compared. My voice, my words, my facial expressions against a company's highest performers. So you think if an employer were to see that number, would I be written off most likely? Would it be filtered out of the process completely? No, absolutely not, actually. What we would recommend is that the candidates could be rank ordered by that, but they still go and look at the different videos. So you're telling me that everybody who goes through this, they get...
I'm going to stop here because, this is in 2018 and we were still grappling with, like, do people actually watch this video or is this AI? But, that is sort of like the origin story. Like when I saw that, I was like, okay, we have to like look into this. And this was like, it's a 10-minute video for the Wall Street Journal that started this whole progression for me. And, when I went to these conferences, I saw hundreds of vendors. I heard from so many job seekers that were subjected to some of these tools. And I was like, okay, we got to look into it. And then, I did another article. And over time, I was like, I think this is like so massive that this needs to be in a book. Like this is not just article by article or like podcast by podcast or something like that. I work in a lot of different media. This is a larger inquiry, how this world of work and, not only hiring, but also monitoring at work, firing with algorithms. Like we see AI now, not only everywhere in hiring, but also, monitoring at work. And we also see it for firing. We also see like health questions coming into, the sort of health analysis coming into the world of work. So that was sort of the origin story. I think what's also a little bit, kind of interesting is like, as a journalist, what we also do a lot is like, so Nathan keeps talking about that, a human will watch this probably. And I was always like so interested by that because I was like, well, these companies pay like millions of dollars and to make life more efficient for them, why would they watch us if we have an AI score if they pay for that? Seems I don't know. But he kept insisting on that. So I used what anyone can use in the United States, or even outside the United States, a Freedom of Information request, because I found out that Atlanta Public Schools used HireVue's AI to hire teachers in a study. So I requested all of the emails between Atlanta Public School and HireVue. And lo and behold, in one of the emails, Nathan had written that they're going to start this project, and if anyone who scores under 33% would automatically be rejected. That was their cut score. So I think that was interesting too, to learn. I was like, okay. And, for me, as a journalist, it's helpful to understand what are the assumptions that go into the system when they're being set up, right? Like, because humans obviously operate, start these systems. And then secondly, what's really worrisome about this technology is, like, the more I looked into it, there is no science here. There is no science of facial expression analysis in job interviews, right? Like what facial expressions we have to when we answer, are you a team worker or not? Or something like that. We have no idea what those facial expressions, if they infer any successfulness in job. Like that is, there is no science there. There's also no science of intonation of our voices. And in fact, we know that this could be even worse, that, if a company just has more white males or something like that, it could be that the system just picks up whatever facial expressions white males have or what words they use, right? And just replicate sort of the biases built into the system. So I did this Wall Street Journal video in 2018. A year later, Drew Harville at the Washington Post had a page 1 expose. Then Epic, that's a non-for-profit organization, complained to the FTC about truth in marketing about HireVue, and said, like, they market this and we don't actually think this is truthful and it's working. And so the good thing is that HireVue did, a couple of years ago, did phase out the facial expression analysis, and also phased out a little later the intonation of voices part, the company says. So it's just the words that are now being analyzed. I'm also looking into that because I'm sort of like, is that also working? Let's check that. But I think we sort of see this again and again, that we use successful employees as sort of the benchmark, and not actually thinking, well, what are the skills that we need? And I think there can be a lot of problems that we maybe just carbon copy the people who are already in the job, and that can be really, really problematic. So the problem is also a little bit with hiring is, like, the largest vendor stopped using is there's kind of other vendors that have come up now using some of the same technologies again. And, it feels like, wait, we just debunked this. Why are they coming back? But I think one other glimmer of hope is, like, there is a lot of attention from regulatory and government agencies, and the EU AI Act bans this kind of emotion technology as outlawed in the European Union. So hopefully, other companies will follow suit and, outlaw it in other places as well.
Amazing. Amazing. What a journey. And just as context for folks who are just joining us, Women in AI Ethics started with the 100 Brilliant Women in AI Ethics list in 2018. So around the time by you doing this investigation, the books that came out was Sophia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression came out, and then we also had the Gender Shades paper, the Joy Bulvini, Debraji, and Timothy Brew published, and so on. So women have been working in this space, like yourself, in this space for a long time. But like you said, ubiquitousness of these tools is because the vendors are pushing, like keep pushing forward, right, with all of these, the hyped up offerings. So one thing, we did invite Meredith Dressad, who we now interviewed twice, to Brooklyn Public Library last week to talk, it was just last week, to talk about some of these issues. And one thing came up is this myth, right? There's so much mythology that comes out of Silicon Valley. And one of them is this algorithms and AI is objective. It's all math. It's all math, right? Math is objective. And it was just, can you help us just debunk some of these that I would say just nonsense that is spewed in the name of science and math? Are these algorithms objective? And then, even is objectivity the right metric? Is that really good for us?
I mean, like there is, I can talk about, like, the vendors sort of market these tools, right, by saying one size fits all. It doesn't matter if you're an HR manager and you have a bad day and you see people differently, right? The tool will judge them all the same way. And, hopefully that is true. I mean, that some tools change as they get more training data, and that's really problematic, right? If a tool changes between applicants, how can that then be an apples to orange and oranges comparison? But let's assume, the algorithm judges them all. My question is more like, first of all, it doesn't necessarily mean, you might have an objective or whatever that means, algorithm, but if the training data is biased, the biases will be, in all likelihood, replicated. And in fact, there could be new biases built into the system. And so what we see in at least in hiring, all of the training data is biased, because what companies use is, so for example, I looked into resume screeners. So, LinkedIn isn't just sending the 1,000 applications that they get for a job to a recruiter and you get like 1,000 resumes in one folder, right? They're ranked so that a recruiter will only call the first 50, right? You're not going to call all 1,000 people. The same as with big companies, all have these resume parsers, resume screeners. And some of them are just like job description, keywords in there, and here's the resume and how much is their overlap. But some of them are also training the tool with resumes of people who are successful in the job. So maybe you have, I don't know, 1,000 retail associates. You take the resumes because they're all assumed successful. And you build the tool with that and tell the tool, find out what makes these people successful. So yes, a tool will do a statistically significant analysis. Unfortunately, the tool doesn't think at all. It doesn't have any cognition or can learn morality or anything like that. So what happened when I talked to employment lawyers who look at when vendors and companies sometimes talk to each other and negotiate a deal, some companies will bring in employment lawyers and others to sort of check these systems. And they found out when they checked the systems that some of these resume parsers sort of had found out, probably mathematically correct, that the name Thomas was a predictor of success, because probably there were a bunch of Thomases in that pile of resumes. Is that a criterion we should use in hiring? Absolutely not. It turns out, obviously, I mean, it doesn't even turn out every human knows that. Your first name has nothing to do with your qualifications for the job, right? But a tool only learns it's like statistically significant. Other things that some of these tools learned were that the locations like Syria and Canada were relevant keywords. So that could be discrimination based on national origin, which is illegal in the United States. There were other tools that found that Africa and African American were keywords that were used to select candidates. That is potentially racial discrimination. Another tool had learned that people who have the word baseball on their resume are successful in the companies and got more points, and people who had the word softball on their resumes got fewer points. I mean, this was not a baseball trainer position or anything that had to do with baseball. In fact, maybe somebody who knows softball would have been actually really qualified to do this. So this is just like statistical correlation inferences, but obviously a tool doesn't know if they're meaningful to actually predict success in the job. And that's what happens here. Yeah, I mean, there could be objective, but if the training data is problematic, which there always are, because in hiring, human bias has underestimated women, people of color, people with disabilities for decades. That's why they're not as much represented in the workforce as for example, white men, and they're not advancing as much because we know that in performance reviews, even though people may do the same great work, women and people of color are underestimated. And so if, some companies use performance review to train these tools, same problem. Like everywhere you look, most companies have not achieved true diversity in all ranks, probably none in the United States. So all of the data they feed into these systems will be biased. So I think that's interesting for me. It's like, we know the training data, we know the results. What the algorithm does in the middle, I mean, it might be interesting for some software engineers. For me, what's interesting is like, is there discrimination and do these tools work? And I think we can actually check that out.
what bothers me, there's so many things that bother me, right, about this issue, is this notion that AI is not only ubiquitous, that is forced on us as this inevitability, that everything has to be AI, everything has to be, look at how objective it, look at how the other myth that's always perpetuated, look at how productive it's making us, right? So can we talk a little bit about how productivity is used as a way to sell these tools, but at the same time, are these tools really helping, or is it hurting productivity? And especially recruiting tools, right? Are you able to find good candidates through this? Are you filtering out the good ones?
Yeah. It's really interesting, right? So I think, I do have a little bit of an understanding for companies that they feel overwhelmed by all the applications, right? Like IBM says they get about 5 million applications a year. Google says they get about 3 million. So there aren't enough humans in the world to go through all of these resumes. And we don't necessarily want humans to go through it either, because they have their own biases, right? They might see Harvard and think you are the most, gifted person ever walking on the face of the planet, which is not true. It says more about your socioeconomic background than about your abilities if you got into Harvard or not. But I think so. What we really need to think about is, like, the company set out, this is more efficient, saves labor cost, cuts down the time for hire, does bias-free hiring, and finds the most qualified candidates. So for the companies, apparently it is so efficient and it saves so much labor cost that they keep using it because they love using it. And so it must be like a cost-benefit analysis that this is working. Does it find people without bias? I have actually counter evidence to that. That's not true. And the other part is also, like, does it find the most qualified candidates? We don't actually know that. And in fact, we know from the surveys of the leaders that they know that their own tools reject well-qualified candidates. So yeah, we don't actually know if they find the most qualified candidates. But I think the efficiency seems to be so high that companies do not care to build better tools, or they might also not be aware of it. That's just a hypothesis, that maybe that's why so many companies complain that they can't find the right talent, because what comes in on the other side of the 100 most qualified, maybe they are not that qualified, but a recruiter or HR manager believes that these are the most qualified people that the algorithm found for them. So they will start complaining, like, oh, we can't hire the right people. So I think that's a real problem that we haven't fully addressed.
Oh my. You alluded to this a little while before, about how this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You already have this is bias on scales, where, like, you're just discriminating at scale. So many these issues that you pointed out, which is bias by proxy, discrimination by proxy, and putting it behind a black box and saying this is all math, so how could it possibly be biased? And you're right, they did this measurement of, they know behind closed doors this is a problem, but they're not sharing it or not changing their ways.
I don't want to necessarily, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I assume that everyone has good intentions, right? That the vendors do want to buy a system that is helpful and doesn't discriminate. Also, that employers want to buy systems that work. And I think they do have, you would think they have an incentive that the tool works and, finds the best candidates and doesn't produce bias, because they do want a more diversified workforce and they want the best applicants. But I think what's sort of a problem is, like, sometimes, I've talked to now so many HR people that, like, they're like, yeah, we use that video gaming tool for hiring for a couple of years, and we had the same problems that you encountered and you wrote about, and that there's gender discrimination. And so we quietly stopped using the tool. I'm glad they stopped using the tool. The problem is no one else is none the wiser, right? Like the companies don't, a large company is not, or a small company is not going to publicize that they found gender discrimination in the tool, and that's why they abandoned it. So the vendor, are they going to talk about how their tool produced gender bias? No. Or gender discrimination? No. But if the companies don't talk about it, the problem is there will be no pressure on vendors to do better, and the public will never know. But there is a reason why a lot of companies don't want the public to know, because they're afraid of a lawsuit, right? Like if Amazon came out a few years ago and said, like, we try to build a resume parser, sort of the same things that I've encountered again and again, right? The tool was trained, I guess, maybe in the tech division with more resumes from men. So over time, the tool figured out that like people have the word woman or women on their resume are not successful at this company, so they got downgraded. So I think companies are afraid of like class action lawsuits because now, this is like discrimination on a much grander scale, right? Like one hiring manager can discriminate against, I don't know, 50, 100 people. I don't know how many they hire a year, and that does suck. But a tool that is used in 3 million applications and discriminates possibly against hundreds of thousands of women. I mean, that is a massive class action lawsuit waiting to happen. And so I think companies are really, really afraid to show like, oh yeah, we used this and it didn't work and it produced bias, that they're going to be in really legal trouble. And the problem is also that the job seekers don't know what's happening to them, right? Like everyone I've ever talked to who's done a HireVue interview, one-way video interview, didn't know that AI may have been used. They all thought humans are watching this. So, and that can be true. Some companies only buy the video product and they have humans watching it. But I know at the time that some companies only used a HireVue's AI product, and these people took a job interview with that company via HireVue, so they must have been subjected to AI. And they didn't know. So job seekers don't know. And also as job seekers, I mean, I don't know how many times I got rejected for a job. We get rejected all the time. How am I supposed to know that, I would assume I'm not the most qualified candidate. How would I know that it may have been a faulty algorithm? And even if it's a faulty algorithm, I have to prove in a court of law that I was harmed, that there was like something built into the tool that was harming me. But I don't know that. The companies that use it don't know that. And often the developers don't know that either because they use deep neural networks. Nobody needs to know what that actually means, but it means that like we use training data to tell the tool, learn, what these people have in common. But we don't necessarily know what exactly they're being inferred upon. So it's only when then employment lawyers come in or other, employment lawyers adjacent folks who come in and actually task the software to say like, well, how did you decide that this person is the most qualified candidate? And then the software spits out, well, because they had the word baseball on their resume and whatever else. That's when we find the bias. So technically people can take out those keywords and say like, don't use those keywords, but they're always new proxies, right? Like we think, for example, when I talked to somebody at one of the largest retailers in the US, they said like, through surveys, we found out that people stay longer in a job, which we want for our sales associates, when they know about somebody at the store. So that is totally predictive, statistically significant. So they were thinking like, well, maybe we should ask that question and like, bump up those people who know somebody at the store because, they will stay longer. Sounds great. Sounds totally neutral, right? Like that doesn't mean, there's no discrimination in that. Well, it turns out, when you look at the results of the survey, that mostly Asian Americans, for whatever reason, know somebody at the store and African Americans do not. So if you use that as a criterion, you would like build in discrimination that looks totally neutral, but actually has a terrible discriminatory effect on one or more groups. And I think that's sort of the problem that we see in these tools a lot. Like technically you can take out locations and other things, but there's always new keywords or new criteria that, we can't even fathom have a discriminatory effect. So that's kind of a real problem.
Discrimination by proxy just continues to be so pervasive based on the date you graduated, right? That leads to age discrimination based on the kind of sports you play, that you don't even have to mention the word women. If somebody plays, yes, men play one sport than another, so many different ways, which is why work like this is so important. And also what is important is you're giving context. Like you say, it's not a conspiracy theory. Everybody has best intentions and we hope we give everybody benefit of a doubt, but intentions by itself don't matter. It's exactly the action you take to address.
Right? Like, exactly. I'm not saying that people are malicious or, I'm just saying like the way the system is set up, it's not conducive to build better tools. There isn't enough pressure on this. And there's also like an incentive to not, really think through the tools because it's all about efficiency. It's not about building the right tool, using the right science. And, actually to do that, that would probably take a little while to, to build these kinds of tools, but a lot of the vendors are backed by VC money, and they need to deliver return on the investments. They need to like sell these products really fast. And it's sometimes shocking when I go to these conferences and I talk to the developers, and one said, we found this. They have a personality analysis built into audio interviews. There's no video, but they do on our audio do an inference of like, are we more dominant? Are we more conscientious? And when I asked them, I was like, where did this come from? They're like, oh yeah, it was like a plugin in Python. I was like, okay. I was like, who built the plugin in Python? Like, who tested this? Like, is this like actually working? They're like, I don't know. I mean, it's built in. So that makes me really worried, right? That there isn't a whole lot of due diligence thinking through, and there isn't the same things either at employers. Like, I'm looking for employers who want to test these tools with me on a long-term basis. Like, right? If you hire thousands of retail associates every day in the United States. Okay, so let's do a study to have people hired by sort of traditional hiring methods, maybe by humans, have them go through the systems for years, use different AI tools, keep the labels on people, but obviously don't tell anyone that maybe somebody was classified as yes or no by the tool, and check for years, like, does this actually lead to did the tool predict if somebody is going to be successful? And obviously, people leave jobs for different reasons. I mean, I might be successful, but I leave because, I have a family emergency. So 1 or 2 people is not enough, right? It has to be a gigantic sample size to actually make kind of inferences here. But I haven't seen companies do this, which I think would actually be a great contribution to humanity. So I can't actually tell you, is human hiring better? Is machine hiring better? Because we don't actually know.
Indeed. Thank you for that important context, because the fact that companies may not be sharing this outside of, like, they know, but they're not sharing because of fear of lawsuits and other, is context that most technologists don't have, and people are using it also don't have. So it's important to know that and make it easier for companies to share that data. So that's one. But there's also this notion that what you don't know won't hurt you, but it is hurting real people. So when you filter out and without proper context, you might be solving the wrong problem. We always run up against this. It's always this issue why women in AI ethics exist, because this notion of we don't know any qualified women. The question is, do you not know any qualified women, or is your process filtering out the qualified women? That's an important question to be asked, and how we are using AI tools not to scale. But we have only 15 more minutes, but I do want to switch gears a little bit. For folks who are joining, please pick up this book. We have Hilke Schellmann, and make sure, I hope you can see it. Yes, yep. Make sure you buy her book, The Algorithm, and keep it on your shelf. It's a wonderfully researched book. So switching gears, can you talk about the disturbing practice that anything you say or do on social media can be used against you in a professional setting? Because for a lot of us, personal is personal, professional is professional, right? They both never shall meet, right?
I mean, I think that is sort of changing a little bit, that we see companies trying to analyze what they often call data exhaust, or, sort of the data that we leave behind. And I think the idea is, it's the same with like the facial expression analysis and other things that we see in hiring often, is like companies want to look under the hood, right? Like, you present yourself in your resume and you make yourself sound like the best qualified person, and you may be. But companies want to know, like, who are you really? Like, can I find out who you really are, your personality in your LinkedIn and Twitter, for example? So there's a few different ways that this is happening. We see AI background checks for hiring that can take social media into account, and we've seen this. The one thing that candidates though have is they can ask for disclosure, because that's actually federally regulated, that you get your background check. You can ask for your background check and you can appeal it, right, if there's a mistake. So that's the one time we had some job seekers get it, and they found out that like an AI to reflect like their social media when they had liked, I don't know, like one tweet was like, I saw a toddler running through Trader Joe's with a bottle of liquor, and the mom screaming. They had liked that tweet. And it was like flagged bad for alcohol. so that, there's no context. Did you actually write this? Are you endorsing this? Like, obviously, like an AI doesn't know that, but endorse it as bad. So this person, this job seeker was actually flagged as and maybe they were applying for a new job within the same company. They had changed their system and they had to all reply. So they asked for all of this disclosure and got hundreds of pages. But we also see this, it's called continuous background checking, where companies check on social media continuously for their employees, like what are they posting, and the companies say they can find if you are prone to self-harm, if you're violent, possibly if you're possibly racist, if you're gonna, like, I don't know, get angry and maybe bring a gun to work or something. I mean, I'm not 100% sure how all of these very threatening categories can actually vet by an AI. But the companies advertise that. We know it's being used, and it's also being used to like sort of figure out people's personality and sort of make hiring decisions, but also decisions about like maybe you should be in leadership training. So that's one way. And then we also see surveillance, and that might be sort of the larger things, is like that we see surveillance at work now of a lot of employees, and that obviously, was already around before the pandemic. In fact, I would sort of argue that maybe offices were invented so that managers can look at people that they're actually working. But now we can like actually check like everybody's keystroke, right? Everything you say on Slack, and there's AI tools now that check so everything you write on Slack, any kind of text in Google and Gmail, and it also checks, who's a bully in Zoom meetings, can read out the transcripts, the audio, and make inferences like who contributes a lot, who's quiet, who's using like very aggressive language. And some of that will be recorded by the company and can actually be like, some of these signals will be brought up to like HR, IT, legal, whoever is like part of the system. And we know that 8 out of 10 of the largest companies in the US surveil at least part of their employees, and that there's a New York Times figure. And then now we also know that there's a like Starbucks, Chevron, Delta Airlines, Walmart use software that does sort of make these inferences if you're like prone to violence, if you were out of compliance, and use that on their employees. So this is pretty ubiquitous as well. And some people know, and I've talked to some people who knew that they were surveilled because, one person I spoke to, Emily Smith, she's a medical coder. And she said, I used to put a timer because I only had a 50-minute break and I needed to go to the bathroom. And if I needed longer, I still wanted my snacks. I like timed myself because as soon as I was, not active green anymore, I would get a call from my boss, like, what are you doing? And, she said at the end of the day, they got a lock who was like the most productive, the least productive. And she had so much anxiety and stress. And we know that from research that like, so monitoring and surveillance at work, if it's done in a punitive way, has the opposite effect. First of all, it's like really stressful and really bad for employees' mental health. And it actually doesn't bring up productivity, as is, I think, the hope of these companies. In fact, what it does is sort of like, this is a testament to human ingenuity, is like it leads to productivity theater often, that we now, it's like this new category of people, who sort of know that they're being surveilled in one way or another. And, they show up at meetings to just like show their face that they're not even invited to on Zoom, to just be like, hey, I'm here. Or they check in on Slack in the morning. Say like, hey, 8 a.m., like ready to work. And then they take the dog for a walk. Or they have like mouse jigglers so that their mouse just jiggles. So the problem is a lot of people spend an hour or so a day of work doing this theater and not doing productive work. So it's actually like having this like really weird opposite effect that like employees are unhappy. They often leave more often. It affects their health. They do this productivity theater. It doesn't actually bring up productivity. But I think the drive, and I think here's one of the sort of weird tensions in the workplace, that I think, a lot of CEOs, and maybe part of this is just lip service, like do say like, I need creative people, skeptical people, like people who think outside the box. But then I'm also like, because we can track those signals, I'm also going to track everyone and like let the AI decide what are the inferences and if they're being productive or not, without actually any relevant scientific backing to that. Because we can pull in the signals, right? Like we can record what everyone is doing on the computer, but is that actually meaningful? Like, does that actually, and I did some tracking myself, and, I do a lot of phone calls as a reporter. Obviously, they weren't tracked by the system, so I was unproductive, which, I would argue these are actually one of my most productive times. But, a tool wouldn't record those instances. And, it turns out for most jobs also, it's actually really hard to say what makes somebody a high performer. Is it like the phone calls? Is it the emails that I write? I mean, it could be so many things. And in fact, many people do the same job in very different ways and are all successful. And so it's like really hard outside of sales jobs where you can like sort of count, did you sell 10 chairs, and you're not creating a toxic work environment. That might be somewhat easy to ascertain performance, but for other people, it's like really hard. And it's almost not it's not doable to just track the signals and make an assumption. But the technology is there. It's easy. And, I think the pandemic pushed that a lot of managers wanted to use them. And once the technology is established, very hard to take it away and abandon it. And I think one of the problems I've seen too is like, another problem is that once the data is there, it might also be used. And I think that's sort of maybe talking a little bit about the firing, where we see now some signals of AI is being used, right? Like I've not seen, well, maybe not. I mean, some warehouses have very strict productivity rates. And if you fall under them, I don't know, you have to put 300 items into packages every hour or so. And if you fall under that ratio, we've definitely seen that some folks have been like automatically fired. So I would assume that's like sort of an algorithmic firing model. But what we usually see, like some data that the company has gotten is then being used as part of the signal to fire people. So talked to an analyst who was previously a Gartner, Brian Kropp, who talks to a lot of companies. He said, oh yeah, we had one company that, is pre-pandemic, they wanted to find new people to promote. And what they did was they checked the key card access, like, when you walked into the office and out, to check who were the most dedicated employees that should be promoted. Obviously, already the wrong way to check this, obviously, I would say, because we know now that people with disability and mothers like actually are a lot less at work, and just sitting with your butt in your seat doesn't mean you're very productive, right? You can just browse the internet all day and not do a thing. And maybe if you only work 3 hours a day, you might be the most productive employee. So already sort of the wrong way to ascertain that, but the company did that. And during the pandemics, they had to do layoffs. They wanted to look at that data again and look at like, let's look at the underperforming people, maybe those lazy people, quote unquote, whatever the assumption was, right, that don't show up in the office. And let's fire those. And I think that's, really problematic. So the problem is not only like the data can be really not meaningful, it can also be used then for other use cases that it was never generated. And that's a whole other problematic thing.
So we only have 5 minutes, but can I just share some feedback on your book? And
Yes.
someone responded to me and said, this was such an enlightening and terrifying book. Because when you start looking at the extent of how these algorithms are designed and built and used against us and used against certain groups, we have not even intentionally used against. I use the word so using that term loosely, but it is truly terrifying. So thank you for enlightening us on that. We have 5 minutes. I have one last question for you so we can bring it back to what can people do, what are actionable results. But are you able to stay? We have so many questions. Are you able to stay
I can stay a
longer?
little longer, no problem.
Okay,
I definitely
fantastic.
have till 12:30 even, like if we,
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. So what we'll do is, folks, just for those of you joining us, missed the announcement that we will record the first hour of this, and then we go into Q&A. And thank you to our guests for agreeing to stay, and you can continue to ask your question. We'll take as many as we can. So last question is, how can we take back control? It feels completely out of control. It's
Yeah.
out there. You said it's ubiquitous in so many different formats. What are some solutions that you suggest?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot of power that individual job seekers have, right? Because they have to use these systems to apply for jobs. I mean, I do think that like ChatGPT is like really helpful for job seekers now, right? Like to help them like maybe generate cover letters, polish their resumes, help them think through like, what are the most often asked questions? What are the best answers maybe to some of these questions, right? Like it helps you prep a little bit and maybe level the playing field a little bit. And, some job seekers sort of joke about like AI against AI, let the best, AI win, because they know that a lot of companies use AI, at least in like the early screenings, right? So I think I often think about, and this is like the CEO of ZipRecruiter said that too, was like, look, like most of the times, like in the early, when you have a large applicant pool, like that's when AI is used to like cull down the number of applicants. Like it's used in the rejection when there's a whole likelihood that someone is going to get hired and you have like 10, 50 people or so left. That's when a human gets involved, right? And then you have an interview with a human, or 7 interviews with humans, which can be part of the job search as well. That's often how we see it, and we see this mostly in like really, really large companies, right? Because like if you only hire 3 people a year, you're not going to build this whole calibrated system, right? What you may use, and I see that now too, is like job platforms like Indeed and LinkedIn and others, like they're pushing into that market too, because they want small employers or mid-sized employers who are not going to use some of these big tools, although they're now built into like applicant tracking systems and benefits, so Workday and other big vendors that even mid-sized companies use, Oracle, SuccessFactors, and that they all have also AI built in for some of these applicant tracking systems. And I don't know which companies turn them on or off. No one needs to tell me or anyone else or a regulatory agency. But I think what can be done is like we see some regulation, right? We see the EU AI Act, which I was so glad to see that hiring and AI at work is actually in the high risk category, because I think we've thought a lot about like policing, facial recognition, and AI in mortgages, and those are all important, very important things to think about. But we haven't really looked about hiring and work so much, because I think it's just not as visible, and it wasn't really clear what kind of the harms could be. So I think it took us a little longer to get that out, and it was really helpful to see that, okay, in the EU, some of the most worst things like the emotion expression will be outlawed, and the other things in hiring will be at a much higher level and have to be shown to produce no harm. There's probably some audits that needs to be done, although I'm very skeptical of some of the audits, especially the New York City law, where companies can decide themselves if they use AI for decision making, and as soon as there's a human involved, companies can often sort of decide, oh, maybe we are not privy to the law, and then they don't have to audit, and the audit standards are very low in a way. Like it's not looking at intersectionality. There's a whole kind of slew of problems that we see with that law. But hopefully this law will be better in the European Union, and we see a lot more scrutiny of these tools. So I think, talking to regulatory agencies, sometimes, we see maybe in California and other states, there might be, I've had some success with people in the European Union who use the general data protection law to get the data from the companies, and looked at all of the results that they got, and started like basic legal action. And one person, Martin Burge, actually got Bloomberg, who used an AI games vendor, Plum, in London, got them reprimanded for lack of disclosure, and he shared all the data with me, and that was really helpful. So my hope is some maybe more progressive states like California, for example, often will have maybe some laws that then individual job seekers can get some information. But I also think just like pushing lawmakers, regulatory agencies to sort of make a change will be helpful. I'm also hoping that I'm not sure that if all the regulatory agencies are going to hire enough technologists to sort of look at all of these tools and audit them. And in fact, there should probably be an AI impact assessment before these tools are even be used, right? You really need to think through before you produce the harm, what could happen. They need to be closely monitored. But I'm hoping also that I feel like, some tools we should never build, right? Obviously, the emotion recognition, no one should build any tools for that for hiring. but maybe there's a way to build a resume screener that is not biased. And I'm sort of thinking like, well, maybe I need to try it and put that in the public interest, and not me, but with a team of interdisciplinary folks who actually can do this. I wouldn't be able to do it, but and sort of like talk about the ways it doesn't work and talk about the ways that it does work. And maybe with that, we can put some pressure on companies and vendors to do the right thing. More so than, regulatory agencies are also scrambling to take action because, for example, the EOC, you have to have a job seeker who can prove harm for them to initiate a case. Job seekers don't even know that AI is being used to them, let alone that they potentially have been harmed. Like, how are they going to have evidence of harm that then the EOC can use? So it's a little bit of a really problematic legal cycle here that we're in.
Agree. Like, plus one to everything that you've described, like needs collective action, regulatory action, and also we shouldn't put the onus on the job seekers who are already in a vulnerable position to be doing all of the work. One group that I do want to also mention here who can play a role, if you are a hiring manager, if you are a hiring team, make sure that if you're seeing the output, and this is inspired by a conversation I had last night with an amazing woman leader, she manages a huge team. Anytime she sees resumes come through and there are no women, or there's just one demographic included or one race, or she pushes back and she says, no, send me more. We have to start pushing back. If you are in a position of power, you can make this decision. Push back when you see the output is not meeting your diversity goals, because you know what diversity looks like, right? It has to be a mix of expertise, races, and genders and abilities. So please use your power for good. We all individually have a little bit of influence. And please, again, I cannot stress enough, please do pick up Hilke Schellmann's book. The algorithm is
because
just amazing.
I do exactly want to empower HR folks, right? Like, I feel like they often feel not empowered because the company decides to use some of these screening tools, maybe. But I think if they do some of the pilot testing and look at the technical report so if the vendor doesn't even have a technical report, how they validated these tools, that they work and how they were tested for bias, like I wouldn't even engage with the vendor. But you can really like scrutinize the technical report, do a pilot phase. And I think if you find stuff in there, like, I mean, I hope that I find it hard to believe that leadership would not listen to that they would then not buy a tool that is so obviously flawed. I think we just need to do more testing and more scrutiny and more skepticism. That I do hope that we can, at the HR level, sort of get rid of some of the problems. But I think, a lot of people fall prey to like the AI hype and everything has to be AI and it's like the best thing ever. That, it is a transformational technology. It is like really helpful in a lot of use cases, but we really need to check if all use cases are the right use cases and if it, it can produce bias,
Again, appreciate you so much for coming here, taking the time, writing an entire book. So we'll close the recording section. Just a big round of applause, virtual applause, and so much respect and admiration for you. Thank you for joining us today.